The Falcons are back in the win column with a complete domination of the New Orleans Saints.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And the Locked On Podcast Network is now the number one sports podcast network on the planet, which means it's number one in the galaxy. I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, been covering the Atlanta Falcons for almost 2 decades. And of course, today's episode, we will be breaking down this illustrious Week 12 win over the New Orleans Saints by the Atlanta Falcons. But today's Locked On Falcons is brought to you by Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Now, the reason why Locked On is the number one sports podcast network in the galaxy is all thanks to you, the everydayers who make shows like Locked On Falcons, as well as so many others, your first listen each and every day. And all you got to do to become an everyday subscriber, follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So again, we're talking all about this Falcons 24-10 win over the New Orleans Saints in Week 12. It feels so good to talk about a win for once on this podcast. We'll be dusting off the Kirk Cousins chaos meter when we talk about Kirk and the new look Atlanta Falcons offense. Zach, what are you cooking? Zach, what are you up to? Let's get an eagle screech in there for our guy, Zach Robinson, out here cooking up stuff in the lab. We'll talk about the complete domination, the resiliency that the Falcons showed on this particular Sunday, especially very timely resiliency after a 5-week slide in the losing column. And then, of course, we'll talk about the defense and sort of a slightly different version of the Falcons defense that is a little bit more impressive. And it's like, are we back to being a top 5 defense? So we'll break all of that down. But it was a complete performance from the Falcons. They won in all 3 phases of this game: offense, defense, special teams. The score, was 24-10. The Saints' only touchdown was on a pick 6 in this game, and you could argue that was, Kirk threw a pass to Kyle Pitts that was Pitts didn't catch, but you could argue that he got pass interfered with, ball deflected off him, and then whoever the Saints defender was, I don't remember who it was, took it to the house for a score. But other than that, this could have easily been like a 24-3 type of ball game, if not for that one sort of unlucky bounce for the Falcons. And, Falcons did get off to a little bit of a rocky start with the 3-and-out to start the game, but then New Orleans made a mistake. Second play of their opening series, there was a botched exchange between Tyler Shuck and Alvin Kamara. The Falcons were able to fall on that loose football. I think it was D. Alford that scooped that one up. Falcons turned that into 3 points. Then the Saints got a big kickoff return, seemingly from Felipe Franks, being out of his lane. But then the Falcons defense got a stop. You got Brandon Dorlus sack, and that led to a Saints missed field goal. And then the Falcons would go down the field and score. That score was set up by a 32-yard swing pass to Bijan Robinson to sort of start the second quarter. And then Kirk finished that drive off with hitting David Sills on a 9-yard touchdown catch with a good blitz pickup by Charlie Warner on that particular play. And after that point, the Falcons going up 10-0. There was really no looking back. And then you get later in the game on the second touchdown that the Falcons scored. It was a 49-yard strike to Darnell Mooney on a deep post off of what looked like a Yankee concept, which I'm like, Zach, what do you do? You don't call Yankee concepts in this offense, but he called one in that particular play. Him and Kirk and Mooney linked up on that, but that play also was set up by a screen pass, a 32-yard screen pass to Bijan Robinson that converted a 2nd and 23, and that was kind of the thing in this game. That play, that 32-yard screen pass, as well as the stop after the big kick return, and I'm sure other plays that I'll, be reminded of when I go back and watch the film tomorrow and whatnot. But like the Falcons showed resiliency, right? We talked about this with myself and Jarvis Davis on, previous Falcons squad shows on Locked On Sports Atlanta, as well as Locked On Falcons. And we talked about how like the Falcons can't afford to make mistakes. They can't afford penalties. They can't afford to get behind the chains because this offense is so precious in terms of like, they just can't dig themselves out of a hole. And they made plenty of mistakes in this game, and they were able to find ways to bounce back and dig themselves out of those holes. And so that was a welcome change for this Falcon team this season, especially coming off of 5 losses. Now, obviously we're sitting here going like, could they have dug themselves out of a hole sooner? Again, we'll leave that conversation for another day. But like, we were ready to, or, I'm using the royal we, you and I here on this podcast, we were ready to declare the season over after the Miami game loss in week 8, right? And then the Penix injury happens this week, and it's like, oh, well, if you didn't think it was over before, it's definitely over. And it was like, oh, we got 7 more weeks of whatever version of the Falcons offense that we've been getting under Kirk Cousins, which has been one of the worst offenses in the league until today. And it wasn't looking dire. Now, we might revert back to that, in the next 6 games or whatever. And so, we'll see if we're looking back at this game similar to what we're looking at that Bills game earlier this season, the last win the Falcons had before today, which is like, oh, that's the high water mark of the season, but it's kind of not what has been the through line, but sort of a one-off, an outlier, or whatever the case may be. But if we sit here and you tell me, hey, the Falcons are only going to win 2 games in their final 7, the rest of the way, I'll take that, especially if the 2 come against the New Orleans Saints. And so that's how much this rivalry means. It was by no means a flawless victory or anything like this, but the Falcons were in firm control pretty much from start to finish. After the first, 2-3 series, and then up until the end of the game, they went up 16-7 at halftime, thanks in part due to 2 missed field goals from the Saints kicker. It's so nice to watch another team go through those struggles of like, oh, your kicker is missing routine kicks. Oh, what a tragedy. Oh, woe is you. Oh, no. But not Zane. Zane was 3 for 3 in this game. Yes, and I know who the kicker's name is. If you don't know what I'm referring to, that's been a running gag on the podcast for the last 2 weeks, where I refuse to learn the kicker's name because it's been a revolving door at that spot. And I was like, that guy ain't staying on the team long enough for me to remember his name. And Zane is now 3 for 3 today. I think that puts him 6 for 6 on the season. So we will absolutely take that. And so you had the Falcons up solid first half, sitting there, as we have seen a number of times in recent games, where the Falcons take an early lead in the first half, and then you're like, oh, here comes the third quarter. Oh, no. The Saints come out, they run the football, they go on a 15-play scoring drive, they bleed 7.5 minutes, just basically, we're just going to run it down the Falcons' throat. But the Falcons played bend but don't break on defense, right? And then you got some key critical stops in the red zone from the Falcons defense. Jesse Bates had a tackle at the 1-yard line on 3rd down, and then Ronnie Harrison had a batted pass on 4th and goal from the 1-yard line, and the Saints wind up with 0 points after a very impressive 15-play drive, potentially to score to start the third quarter. And then, the Falcons go out with a 3-and-out on 3 straight runs, and you're like, oh, here we go again. And then the Saints are driving down the field again, and they stall out again in the 10-yard line. You get a stop by Xavier Watts at the 1-yard line. You get a high snap on 3rd and goal to Taysom Hill, and then he tries to throw the ball away to avoid the sack, and they call intentional grounding. It wasn't intentional grounding, but hey, refs, Arthur Blank is sliding you that check. We appreciate you for being on our side on that particular one. The Saints are forced to settle for the field goal. And based off of those 2 very long drives from the Saints, now we're in the fourth quarter. And the Falcons are, I won't say good in the fourth quarter, but they're certainly better in the fourth quarter than they were than they have been in the third quarter throughout the season. Kirk got his own intentional grounding to start out that ensuing series. And then Bijan takes that screen 32 yards on a 2nd and 23. And then Kirk links up with Mooney for a 49-yard touchdown. And then it's just really about the defense holding, the run game milking clock, and Xavier Watts seals the win with an interception in the final 10 seconds. And we get the Falcons finally snapping this 5-game losing streak, and we'll see if they can do it again. And, that's my response is like, will they do it again? I don't know. We'll see. we're going to celebrate this week. We'll see if we're going to be celebrating next week, but we will always enjoy a win over the New Orleans Saints. And we will absolutely, for the next 5 or 6 days, treat this like one of the biggest wins in franchise history, because hey, whenever you can dunk on the New Orleans Saints, you absolutely have to dunk on them and hang on the rim and point them out and do all the things that you got to do. And we're going to do that for the next week. And so this is a big win based solely off of that, right? In terms of the context of the season, it's, you could argue it's meaningless, right, at this point in the season. But, we'll take what we can get. And, I didn't think we were going to get this from Kirk Cousins in this game, but we had kind of a new version of Kirk Cousins based off of where we had been so far this season, a new version of this Falcons offense under Zach Robinson, and that helped spur on their success. And we'll break it all down as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. With the holiday season coming up, it is one of the best time for sports, whether we're talking bowl games, big basketball matchups in the NBA and college, playoff pushes in the NFL. It's all happening at once. And while we're making all these choices every day, one of the most fun places to make those choices and make the right call is with Prize Picks, our proud sponsor today. It's the easiest way to get in on daily fantasy. Just pick more or less on at least 2 player stat projections, and then you lock in your lineup and you're in the game. It's simple, fast, and available in 45 states, including California, Texas, Florida, and Georgia. And their new stacks feature lets you choose the same player up to 3 times in one lineup, so you can go more on QB yards, touchdowns, and rushing yards. And of course, we love, especially during the holidays, deposits and withdrawals are quick and easy. And it keeps everything flowing this holiday season. So download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $50 in lineups after your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 in lineups after your first $5 play. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. And have your health or family needs changed lately? Well, Georgia's got you covered. Georgia Access is our state's marketplace for Georgians to compare, apply, and enroll in health insurance plans that offer the best value for their individual needs. Open enrollment is happening right now. Visit georgiaaccess.gov today. Georgia Access, health insurance for Georgia by Georgia. And again, I want to thank all of you that make this podcast and so many others across the Locked On Podcast Network your first listen each and every day. And you are the reason why Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, is the #1 sports podcast network in all of the galaxy. So when we talk about this brand new Falcons offense, it was a beautiful thing to see. Falcons out here running 13 personnel with lots of under center play action. 13 personnel referring to 3 tight end sets. According to Next Gen Stats, 60% of the Falcons play, a total of 33 plays, were run with 13 personnel in this game. I believe they showed a graphic during the broadcast that the Falcons had run 13 personnel just 3 times this entire season in their 10 previous games. And according to Next Gen Stats, that 60% was the highest rate of 13 personnel in any game that they've charted since, I believe, like 2016 or whatever it is. And we saw a similar stat with the Falcons' use of 12 personnel, which is the 2 tight end set in week 2 against the Vikings. So, again, talk about Z-Rob. We know Z-Rob loves to spam certain things. And when it works, like it seemingly worked today with the 13 personnel, Falcons offense looked pretty good. The knock on Z-Rob is the adjustments. But again, we're not gonna get into that. He made an adjustment to run this 13 personnel today. 60% of the Falcons' yards, 183 yards, and both of their touchdowns came out of 13 personnel. So we say kudos to you, Zach Robinson, for making this adjustment and running basically a slight different version of the Falcons offense that I thought we were going to get from day one last year, right? I didn't think it was going to be 13 personnel heavy like it was today, but 12 personnel heavy with kind of their base offense being that. And we did see a lot of 12 personnel in the first half of this season up until that Dolphins game. And then, you go back to last year, and it's like, oh, we're going to see a lot of under center play action stuff, a heavy dose of tight ends. And then we got the Bruno game, the week 1 game against the Steelers, for those of you that are not aware of the lore here on Locked On Falcons. And then that went out the window. But like, this is the type of offense that Kirk Cousins is good at, right? Getting under center. And we didn't really see that last year with Kirk. We didn't see that with Penix at any point last year or this year. And of course, that's going to be a big topic of discussion, I'm sure, where it's like, why didn't we get an under center play action heavy offense with Michael Penix? Now, as I've stated on a couple of recent episodes of the podcast, the Falcons play action passing over the last 3 or 4 games with Michael Penix predominantly out of the pistol have been pretty effective. And so it does feel like the Falcons are starting to figure out, Zach, you starting to figure out play action? It's a little too late at this point in time, but hey, you got to take your victories when you get them. But, we've stated a number of times on this podcast that, again, that big talking point is going to be like, why weren't the Falcons doing this with Michael Penix? And we've stated it a number of times on this podcast, so I'll reiterate it for those of you that have missed those episodes when we've talked about it. I know we talked about it quite a bit during the bye week when, the pistol and versus under center and all that stuff was really at the height of its drama early in the season. But, it's been clear, and it basically today's game kind of confirmed it, that this coaching staff didn't think Penix was comfortable running under center stuff, right? It was primarily a shotgun pistol quarterback in college. The Falcons didn't really do a whole lot of under center stuff last year, so he didn't get the training, I guess you could say, the development in that regard. And, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. And I just found out that that's what the actual saying is. Proof of the pudding is in the eating. Sounds ridiculous. But again, this game kind of confirms it, where for the Falcons to go as under center, I don't know what the exact numbers are at this point, but I'm sure we will talk about it later this week. It seemed like, 60-70% of their offense today was under center. So we'll see what the numbers actually look like in this game. But, that's going to lead to, I'm sure, a lot of people being like, oh, they sabotage Penix or whatever. And it's like, all right, if that's where you want to go, that's where you can go. But, coaching is good at putting players in a position to succeed, whether, that's a debatable point with this coaching staff and Michael Penix. But they absolutely, again, whether you think they were holding back Penix or, trying to protect him based off of not using the under center play action passing game as effectively until today, all we can definitely say is that they did put Kirk in a position to succeed, and Kirk responded reasonably well. And that gets us to the Kirk Cousins chaos meter. Like, it's been so long since I've had to dust off this old Kirk Cousins chaos meter. We've been doing the Penix pump meter all season long. The Kirk Cousins chaos meter, again, for those of you that are new to the lore here on Locked On Falcons, if you're going to be an everydayer of this podcast, you got to catch up on the lore. That's why you have to watch each and every day. The lore is the payoff for the everydayers. They know the lore backwards and forwards. But the lore here, the Kirk Cousins chaos meter, comes from Locked On Vikings, right? And they bequeathed this to us last year. We added, it's 4 levels, right? We added a 5th level last year, which was, is it time to turn to Michael Penix? Which was, where the chaos would get too high on the meter, right? Level 1 is no chaos, the opposite of chaos. It's Kirk Cousins being super conservative. And basically what we have seen from Kirk Cousins so far this season has been a level 1 version of Kirk Cousins. Then you have level 2, which is a much more effective version of Kirk Cousins, which is him managing the game effectively. Then you have level 3, which is Kirk balancing those sort of conservative tendencies with just the right mix of chaos that it's actually a positive, and you get the peak version of Kirk Cousins is level 3. And then level 4 is like, it's too much chaos. You're just full on in chaotic mode. And then level 5 is the chaos is so great that now we got to turn our attention to Michael Penix. That was the case last year. Now at this stage, with Penix done for the season, my guy Easton Stick is now level 5 of the chaos. Is it time to turn the page to Easton Stick to finish out the season? Hopefully we will not get there, much to my own chagrin. But this game to me was definitely a level 2 game for Kirk Cousins, where he was in a very effective game manager. It wasn't perfect, probably took some sacks, that pocket mobility was an issue. But when it came to sort of being a point guard, checking the ball down, distributing the ball, and then a couple of big plays here and there, with particularly that Mooney one at the end of the game. And then, of course, just, hey, just throw the ball to Bijan and let him cook, right? You know, the Falcons were effective at doing that. And even the pick six was not really Kirk's fault. It was more on Kyle Pitts, but then again, as I said earlier, like you could argue that he was interfered with on that play, but no flag on that one. So the refs, you know, we're docking you on that check for the intentional grounding. You're not going to get the full price of that bribe there, but good job by Kirk Cousins being an effective game manager. And if we get this version of Kirk and you get the defense playing as well as they did this particular Sunday, you know, and the special teams also doing their job, which again has been a rarity this season. Like that's a winning formula for the Atlanta Falcons. And if we can just get just a little bit of Kirk chaos and get some peak version of Kirk Cousins, then maybe, you know, this Falcon team can turn things around. So we'll talk about the defense, right? We wondered, okay, with Divine Deablo coming back, this defense looking healthy, the healthiest it's been in quite some time. Are we going to get back to being that elite defense that the Falcons showed at the beginning of the season? And it looked like it, and we'll break it down as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So we know the NFL season is, you know, raring to get to the end, and there's nothing better than getting into the stadium surrounded by fans cheering on your favorite team. And we know that getting tickets to NFL games can be quite the hassle, whether we're talking about queues and login screens and prices jumping at checkout. It can be very frustrating. And that's why you got to use Game Time, right? Backed by the Game Time guarantee, where you'll get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time at the best price. And plus, with all the fees included, the price you see is the price you pay. And we love what you see is what you get with the panoramic seat views over at Game Time. And if you head on over to Game Time and download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL, you'll get $20 off your first purchase. So the next time you get to see the Atlanta Falcons in Mercedes-Benz Stadium, the money you save on that first purchase with Game Time, $20 goes a long way for a concession. So make sure you check it out. Terms apply. Again, redeem that code LOCKEDONNFL and you'll get $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. So the Falcons were healthier this week on defense. You know, they welcome back Divine Deablo. They welcome back Mike Hughes. They welcome back D. Alford after those guys missed some time. They did lose Zach Harrison and Billy Bowman, presumably for the rest of the season, with both of those guys going on IR at the end of the week. And so that is a blow that the Falcons are going to have to overcome, but they were seemingly able to take care of business against this Saints team. And I wrote about the domino effect that comes from Divine Deablo over at the Falcoholic, the SB Nation website for the Atlanta Falcons this week. And I think you got to see that, and it'll be interesting to break down the all 22 to get more examples of that being in play. You saw better coverage on the back end, although the Falcons did get gashed a little bit by running backs and tight ends in this game. Gave up 100 yards in this game, despite the fact that Alvin Kamara combined to running backs and tight ends, despite the fact that Alvin Kamara did miss this game. And that was one of the big differences looking up the stats with Deablo in the lineup, where the Falcons were number one in the league and the fewest amount of yards receiving to backs and tight ends in the first 5 games when Deablo was healthy. And they were 31st in the league, giving up, you know, almost over, I think, 115 yards per game over the last 5 games without Deablo in the lineup. But you saw a bounce back game from Caden Ellis. That's a huge part of the Deablo domino effect. The safety play was much better, especially after a down week against Carolina from that unit. And then you saw, you know, because the Falcons didn't have to rely on Ronnie Harrison or J.D. Bertrand to play 50-plus snaps a game, they both got on the field at various points in this game to give guys a rest. But you saw, at least with Harrison, I don't really recall. I think Bertrand might have made a tackle, but Harrison had that one of those critical 4th down stops at the goal line. So you were able to maximize him for the handful of snaps that he was able to play, rather than kind of watering it down for 50-plus snaps like we saw last week against Carolina, or probably 70 snaps or whatever it was. And you also saw the pass rush getting home, right? And what's interesting about this game, contrasted to all the other games, is the Falcons weren't blitzing as much, according to Next Gen stats. Now, Next Gen only counts a blitz basically if you send 5 or more. And so it's possible that when we go back and watch the film later this week, we'll be like, yeah, the Falcons were rushing 4, but they were, you running those simulated pressures where they would, rush a linebacker like Caden Ellis versus, an end or whatever. But according to Next Gen stats, when the Falcons sent 4 or fewer, they got 19 pressures and all 5 of their sacks in this game. And that's a welcome change, because one of the knocks I have been talking about on this podcast, which is like, everybody talks about how this pass rush has turned around thanks to Jalen Walker and James Pearce. And, as I've mentioned before in the podcast, I talked about this on Friday with Jarvis Davis, one of my more controversial takes, which is backed up by hard data. And we'll probably be breaking more of that down here on the podcast and elsewhere in the coming weeks. But the hard data clearly says that the Falcons' pass rush improvement has been primarily fueled by the blitz. They were dead last in the NFL with pressures on 4-man rushes. They were, I believe, 27th in pressure rate prior to this game. When they rushed 4, they were second to last, I believe, in terms of the fewest number of sacks with 4-man. Only like 9 out of the 34 sacks going into this game were when they rushed 4 and whatnot. And so the fact that they were able to kind of flip that in this game is very much a welcome change. And if we can get this type of performance from this Falcons defense and have a more effective 4-man rush for the remainder of the season, that changes where this defense is, because one of the knocks we've had on this defense, not their ability to get pressure with 4, not their ability to stop the run and whatnot. So we will see. Now, granted, part of it is probably they preyed upon a weaker Saints offensive line, similar to what we saw early in the season when we played the Bucs and Vikings without Tristan Wirfs and Christian Darrisaw. You had a backup left guard in the game. You had a backup right tackle in the game. And whatnot. You had a rookie quarterback in the game as well for the Saints, and Tyler Shuck probably contributed to some of those sacks, holding on to the ball, all that stuff, trying to scramble. There were a number of cleanup sacks in this game when he tried to step up in the pocket to scramble, and the Falcons were able to chase him down. But that's been true all throughout the season, so that's not especially novel. Like, I think Brandon Dorlus has like 6.5 sacks or something like this at this point in time, and like all but like one of them are like cleanup sacks like that. And whatnot, but great job by this Falcons front. James Pearce had a good day. Brandon Dorlus had a good day. Leonard Floyd came on strong. Arnold Bichetti almost had a sack in this game. Jalen Walker got some pressure in this game. So a complete performance for this Falcons pass rush. And again, it's a welcome change, right? If you've been a long-time listener of the Locked On Falcons, we don't look at defense in terms of yards and points to the way that a lot of other people do, because I think people tend to cherry pick those stats to fit a narrative. We try to look at 6 different metrics to measure defense. And if you're good across the majority of those 6 metrics, that's usually an indicator that you're actually a good defense, as opposed to a defense that is only good at like 2 of those things and bad at 4 of those things, which has been typically the norm for the Falcons over the years. But those metrics are pass rush, right, measured in sacks, run defense, we'll measure that in yards, third down efficiency, red zone efficiency. Are you giving explosive 20-plus yard plays? And are you creating your own big plays on defense, which are turnovers? And going into this game, the Falcons were like second in sacks, so very, very good, but 27th against the run. And then for the other 4 metrics, third downs, red zone, explosiveness, turnovers, they were in the middle of the pack. They were like basically between like 14 and 20 across the board. And so you put all that together, you average that across the board. They were kind of an average defense holistically when you look at all the different ways you want to measure defense by, which is a welcome change, as we discussed going into the season. Don't get us wrong. We're not complaining about an average defense. We said if Jeff Ulbrich can get this team in the top 20 defensively, this man is coaching his butt off, and he has been coaching his butt off, particularly with the blitz and all the scheming that he's been able to do this season. But in this game, if you look at those 6 boxes that they checked, right, or that you want to see this defense check, they checked all 6 boxes, right? 5 sacks in this game, so pass rush is checked. They held the Saints to just 79 yards rushing in this game. They had that rough drive on the third quarter, but this is only the 3rd time all season long where the Falcons have held their opponent to under 100 yards rushing combined this game. They were able to get stops on third downs. The Saints were 5 of 16 on third downs, which is not a good number. The Saints were 0 for 3 in the red zone. So clearly the Falcons were able to generate 2 turnovers in this game. And then they gave up 0 explosive plays of 20-plus yards in this game. So they checked all 6. This is one of the most complete performances from this Falcons team, arguably the most complete performance of the season. And again, you can sit there and put an asterisk, but like, oh, it's against the Saints. Oh, they're bad. All that stuff. Oh, fine. Okay, fine. But we needed this, guys. We needed this after the last couple of games where the Falcons defense has been anything but good, right? Contrary to popular opinion, right? And so they were able to get that complete performance, not only on the defensive side of the ball, but across the board. Special teams stepping up with a couple of miscues, but for the most part, one of the better special teams games we've seen in a number of weeks. And so we're going to enjoy this win here on this podcast, at least for the next few days. We're not going to necessarily go, oh, well, this means this for the next 6 games. It's like, well, we'll take this for the next 6 days, right? And then we'll see what happens over the next 6 weeks. And so we'll cross that bridge if we get to it when it comes to Falcons' good or bad performances. We're going to take it 1 week at a time, as we always do on this podcast. But, we'll wrap up here. How does this game affect the implications with this coaching staff? Because that has been a big talking point over the last week. Or is this coaching staff going to be out of a job? Should this coaching staff be fired, right? Should the Falcons blow it all up? All that sort of stuff, which will continue to be talking points as the season progresses. But essentially the big question for this team for these next 6 games is, can this coaching staff and the Falcons win enough games to save their jobs? And after today, before today, I was like, nah, right? No. But after today, it's like, hey, it's a strong maybe. It's a strong maybe. So again, we'll see how that goes, how you feel about that. I'm sure each individual will decide it. I know how I feel about that. I'm sure we'll continue talking about it on the podcast and whatnot, but that is where we're at with this team. And so again, we'll celebrate these next 6 days, and we'll see what's what for the Falcons next week against the New York Jets on the road after Thanksgiving. And can they turn a 1-game win to a 2-game winning streak? Right? Again, depending on who you are, I was going to say we would love to see. I don't know if if encompasses everybody who's watching and listening to this podcast right now, but 5-game losing streak, 5-game winning streak. Some people would love to see that. I can't say everybody would love to see that, but we will see if the Falcons can achieve that. So that's going to do it for us here, guys. Appreciate you. Enjoy this win, even if you're not enjoying the season, because again, we will take every opportunity to dunk on them New Orleans Saints. Who that gonna beat them Saints? Oh, it's gonna be we gonna beat them Saints. So enjoy it. Continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen. Check us out tomorrow. Check us out on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. In order to do so, check out Locked On NFL. You want to get the scoop on all of the Week 12 action around the NFL. A lot of big games, a lot of important moments. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network. Now the #1 sports podcast network in the galaxy. Your team every